Just 1 second, Jerry. I'm sorry. So we're on Daf Nun Zayin, and we're up to Tana. So we'll count down from the top about 10 lines. The first word in the line is Zimna. And we're going to mention a Machlokas Tanaim now with regard to the Hazos in the Heichal. And the question is whether these Hazos actually touch the Parochas, or it's just Keneged the Parochas, but it actually falls on the ground. Now we start with the opinion of the Tanakama. Kshu maze, eno maze al ha-parochas ela keneged ha-parochas. The hazos in the heichal of the damapar, the damasor, do not actually, the blood does not actually come in contact with the parochas. Now we have the dissenting view. Omar Rabbi Loza Rabbi Yossi Aniri Isiha Beromi. This is really fascinating. The history here is that, of course, the Romans took over the second Beis Hamikdash, and Gemara tells us a whole story in Me'ilah, Masechet Me'ilah Daf Yud Zayin. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi traveled to Rome in order to try to vitiate all the xeros against the Jewish people. And they did an amazing thing. There was a shade, a demon by the name of Ben Tamalion, who wanted to come with them along to try to help them be Mavatal the Gzera. And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai agreed that he would come along, and somehow, perhaps miraculously, he would help them. And even though the Yeshua would come through a demon, that's how desperate they were. So this Ben Talbion went a little bit before them to Rome. He goes into the house of the Caesar, the capital, and he enters into the body of the daughter of the Caesar. And she goes crazy, and she's yelling and screaming. So that while she's screaming, she says, because again, it's really this demon that's in her body, this divuk, as we would say, please bring Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. And Reb Shimon Bar Yochai comes to Rome. He commands this demon to go out of her body, and she became healthy. As a result, the Caesar takes Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and he brings him into Beis Genozov, his treasury. And he says, take whatever you want as payment for what you did for my daughter, to heal my daughter. He didn't take anything. All he did was those decrees that had been signed and sealed by the Caesar against the Jewish people, he ripped them up. Now, while they were there in Rome, this Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi saw that in the Beis Otzar, in the treasury of the Romans, of the Caesar, there were the Klei HaMikdash that were taken from the Beis HaMikdash. And he looked at the Parochas. This is the Parochas, the curtain that separates between the Heichal and the Kodesh Kodashim. And he testifies, Aniri Isiha Beromi, I saw the Parochas in Rome, V'hoyu oleha kama tipe domin. And I identified that there was blood, there were blood stains, shel par v'sor shel Yoma Kippurim. On the parochas, there were these blood stains. And therefore, I can testify to you that the hazah of the damapar and the damasor actually reached the parochas. So the Gemara immediately raises the following objection. How do you know, how could Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi identify this dam and with all certitude be convinced that this dam is the dam of the par and sor of Yom Kippurim? Vidilma, perhaps we have other occasions which require hazah on the parochas, and that's called a par helem davar shel tzibur. So, for example, if let's say the Sanhedrin gave a ruling and it was a mistaken ruling. As a result, the people, almost the entire tzibur of Israel, violated an Iser Kares. They have to bring a Par Helim Dover Shel tzibur. Then there's another category called Tzeirei Avodah Zara Havu. For example, if the Sanhedrin issued a mistaken verdict as a result of which the people of Israel worship an idol, they have to bring a Seir, which is called Tzeirei Avodah Zara. And in these cases of Par, Helim, Dover Shabar, and Tzeirei Avodah Zara, there's halacha that the dam has to be sprinkled towards the parochas. Maybe here, in regard to the Par, Helim, Dover Shel Tzibur, etc., there is a requirement that the dam reach the parochas. But Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi has no proof that on Yom Kippurim, the dam has to reach the parochas. And the Gemara answers, the chaza, the avide kesidron. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi was able to detect that this dam on the parochas was definitely the Yom Kippur dam. How did he know so? Because with regard to the Yom Kippur hazah, we have a halach that we learned in the previous Mishnah called kematzlif, which means that the dam has to be sprinkled from on top. Each hazah goes one level down in sort of descending strips, and that's called kisidron. Rabbi Eliezer saw that the dam on the parochas was kisidron, and that's a special halacha with regard to the hazah of Yom Kippurim, the par, the dam par, and the dam asar of Yom Kippurim. It does not apply to any other korban, because in the case of Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, etc., there were no hazos lefia seder. Now, the Gemara is going to bring a brisa that records a machlokes with regard to the hazos of Yom Kippurim, exactly where they were. Did they reach the parochas mamish or only samachla? Usnan. Now here there's a girsa problem. The Tosi Shodim points out that it should say Visanya because there's no Mishnah. It's only a Brisa. And we find in the Brisa with regard to Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur Ki Hai Gavna, a Machlokas Tanoim, with regard to the Hazos of the Dam of the Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, does it have to reach the Parochas? And it says in the Brisa, Kshumaze, this is the Tanakama's opinion, Lo Hayu Nogim Biparoches. The dam would not reach and make contact with the parochas. It was only Keneged parochas. Bim Nagu, but if let's say the dam reached the parochas, Nagu. That's not going to pass the Hazah. Omer Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi, Aniri Sia Baromi, V'Hayu Aleh Kama Tipe Damin Shel Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur Use'irei Avodah Zara. According to this transmission of the Brisa, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi was testifying about what he saw in Rome, that there were Tipe Damim of Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur Use'irei Avodah Zara. They reached the parochas and they stay in the parochas. Not like the original transmission that we had, that he was testifying about the dam of the par and the sar of Yom Kippurim. So the Gemara immediately objects, Vidilma the par of his sar shel Yom Kippurim. You know, how did Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi come to the definite conclusion that this was the dam of the par helim Dover Shel Tzibur Use'irei Avodah Zara? And the answer is the Chazinu, because he saw the dam on the parochas, the Avida was done shelo kisidron. It was not organized kematzlif, going from one level down, down, down. Had it been the par or the sar of Yom Kippurim, then we know that the hazar requires kematzlif, one line below the other line going down, down, down. So therefore, he absolutely concluded that it was a dam that came from the Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur and the Seirei Avodah Zara. We have now two different versions of the testimony of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi in what he saw in the parochas in Rome. Now the Gemara goes on to a new topic, and that's a case where there was a taroves, a mixture of the dam hapar and the dam hasoyer. What do we do in this case? This arvulo domim bidomim, meaning the dam of the par and the dam of the soyer before the hazo was done got mixed up. And here we have a major machlokes between Rashi and Tosfos. Rashi learns that this mixture took place before they did the hazah inside the Kodesh Kadoshim. And Tosfos and other Rishonim disagree with Rashi because we're going to have a Gemara later on at Daf Samach Aleph in the name of Ula that if they shechted the soyer before they did the matan domim of the par in the Kodesh Kadoshim, then it's possible. And nobody disagrees with Ula. So how could it be possible that Rashi is explaining this Gemara that there was a taromis of domim before they actually did the hazah of the dam hapar in the Kodesh Kadoshim? Because if that be the case, then the shechita, the soyer would be completely disqualified. So Tosfos and the Rishonim therefore say that this case of taromis domim was after the nesinos, after the matanos lifnim inside the Kodesh Kadoshim, before the nesinos on the heichal. Amar Rava, in this case, no sein achas lamala v'sheva lamata va'olalo lekan ulekan. We're going to see that Rava is saying something absolutely revolutionary here, and he's telling you that the Kohen Gadol in this case, with the tarovas of damim, he could do exactly what he would normally do if he had each dam separately, which means achas lamala sheva lamati does the azos, and they are registered for both the dam hapar and the dam hasoyer. Even though again there's no sequence here because normally the requirement is that dam hapar has to come first and then afterwards, subsequently dam hasoyer. But he can do both simultaneously in this case of taroves, and he fulfills both hazos, the hazov of the dam hapar and the hazov of dam hasoyer. As we would say in colloquial English, he kills two birds with one stone. And this was too much. Nobody could accept Rav. Amrua kami to Rabbi Yirmiyah. When they told over to Rabbi Yirmiyah what Rav had said, Omar, he said, Bavloi tipshoi. Rabbi Yirmiyah came from Eretz Yisrael. Rava was in Bavel. And he accused Rava of being in that category called Bavloim tipchim. Mishum dudari bi'ari d'chashocha. And why do they come up with such ridiculous statements in Torah? It's because they live in a dark land, right? Bavel is on a lower level, so they don't get as much sunlight. Amri, therefore, they say Shmata Dimachashcha. They say Torah, which darkens the world, so to speak, meaning he's not right at all. And the reason for the rejection of Rabbi Yirmiyah of Rava is because Hakayoyev Lamala Desayer Mikame Mata Depar. Because according to Rava, what comes out is that he's being makdim. He's first putting the matana lamala of the damas soyer before he gives the matanos of the dama par lamata. Why? Because the first of these hazos, according to Rava, is ola lakanu lakan. That means it fulfills the kiyum not only the dama par that's mixed here in the taros, but also the damas soyer. He hasn't yet done the 7 hazos of the dama par lamata. He has now switched the whole order around. He has implemented a hazah lemala of the dam hasor before he got to the 7 hazos lamata of the dam hapar. Vatorah Omer, the Torah says, v'kila mechaper es hakodesh, that we're not allowed to be makdim that which comes later before. And that is going to undermine the mitzvah of hazah. The Rishonim have a discussion here as to why Rabbi Yirmiyah had to quote the pasuk v'kila mechaper. After all, we have halacha called chukah, that whenever the Torah says chukah, it tells you that you have to do it according to the order as it's written in the parsha. And if you read the Parsha of Achrimos, you'll see that the matanos of the par come before the matanos of the soil. And whenever it says chukah, that's a requirement. So why did he have to stretch his arm out to this pasuk v'chila mechaper es hakodesh? The Tosfos answers that if we only had the word chukah, we would say that chukah only applies when he was makdim all the matanos of the soyer before the matanos of the par. Here, in this case, he was only makdim one matana, the first of the soyer, before the 7 matanos lamata of the par, and therefore we wouldn't have applied the principle of chukah. And therefore, Rabbi Yirmiyah had no choice but to derive from another pasuk from v'chila mechaper es hakodesh, that he cannot be magdim that which should be coming later. And in this case, alei, the Torah is telling you, finish all the hazos of the dama par, and then achakach, only afterwards, go on to the hazos of the dama sor. So in Rava's recommendation that he's going to be mazeh mikanu mizeh mizeh, then it turns out that the hazah of the soyer is before the hazos of the par. Now, there's a bit of a problem here because even according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, okay, so let's see Rabbi Yirmiyah. Ella Omar Rabbi Yirmiyah nosein achas lamala v'sheva lamata l'shem hapar v'chozer v'nosein achas lamala v'sheva lamata l'shem hasoyer. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, which the Gemara is accepting, you're going to have to do 2 sets of hazos with that tarovas of dam, but everything depends upon the machshava of the Kohen Gadol. First, he's going to have in mind that he's being mazed the dam hapar, which is inside the tarovas. Achas lamala sheva lamata. Then he's going to start from scratch, do another series of hazos, achas lamala, achas lamata, but have in mind that he's doing it for the mitzvah, the chiyuv of hazos damas soyer. So the problem with this is that at the end of the day, even Rabbi Yirmiyah has to agree that he was makdim the damas soyer to the dama par, because the damim are muravim zebazeh. So the dama par on the first hazah reached the paroches or keneged paroches before he did the hazos lemata of the dama par. So what did Rabbi Yirmiyah gain? But the answer is that since the hazos were done l'shem par, the eno machavim l'shem soyer, the first set, eno yotze behem yedei chovas hazah shel damas soyer, he hasn't fulfilled his obligation of hazah vis-a-vis the dam hasoyer. The eno nechshav shekdimo. Ikdimo and kedima, when he changes the order, that only applies when he does an action which would be, under normal conditions, a fulfillment of his chiyuv. But here, it's not a fulfillment of his chiyuv because he didn't have in mind that he's being zorik the dam hapar. So the Rishonim asked, but we have a principle called mitzvos enom trichos kavana. At least according to one mandiyoma, we probably paskin like that mandiyoma. He says, Hainu bismana mitzvah. When do we apply the principle of mitzvahs ein tzrichos kavana? That's only when it's the moment and the time for the mitzvah. However, kan mayri shalo bismana. Why? Shari adayin lo higia zman hazos dam hasoyer ad liachar hazos dam hapar. Ubazeh kuli alma modi shemitzvah strichos kavana. That if he hasn't yet gotten to the time for hazos dam hasoyer in this case, then it would only be meaningful as a dam hasoyer with the problem of kedima if he had kavana. But here he didn't have kavana, and therefore there's no issue. Now the Gemara has a similar case. Nis arvulo domim b'domim b'matonos achronos. So now we're talking after he already implemented the hazah chas lamala of the damapar, He's now ready for the Hazals Lamata, the Sheva Hazals of the Damapar. But in the meantime, everything got mishkababbled, and the Damapar and the Damasor got mixed up. And the Gemara is going to say that Rav Papa thought that the original position of Rava, that's it could be Ola Lakan, is still acceptable. So Rav Papa coming to Rava. Okay, there's a question here whether Rav Papa is a Talmud of Rava, the different Rav Papas. Anyway, so he said in front of Rava, L'meimar, shall we say, no Saint Shevel Amata, L'shem Par, L'shem Soyer. Let him, as we said before, kill two birds with one stone, based on the principle of Rava, that it's Ol Lakan, Ol Lakan. He could do now the 7 Azot Lamata for both the Dam HaPar and the Dam HaSoyer. Then he's missing one Hazal Lamala for the Dam HaSoyer. L'shem Soyer. Omele Rava. Rava says to Rav Papa, they set the record straight already. Adash the Koralon Tipshoy. They called us limited, dull. And Vahashta, now they're going to call us Tipshoy Bitipshoy, with a dull of the dull. To call Megamrinon Lahu Velogamiri. They taught us and set us straight, and we didn't learn the lesson. They're going to tell us that we're double Tipshoy. He has in mind here Rabbi Yirmiyah. The Rabbi Yirmiyah says that we have to be Machala, the kapar of Kol Dover Lefi Sidro. V'akayoyev Mata Desoyer Mikama Mala Desoyer. You're switching around the order of the Soyer. You're going to do the 7 Azos Lamata of the Soyer before you do the Azol Lamala of the Soyer. Torah Omra, the Torah says, Tain Lamala, V'achakach Lamala. Lamata. We always start with Azah Le Mala, and then we go to the Azah Lamata. You're switching around the order.